Bambi is going to be speaking with Mike Jones, the founder of Science, and of course the former CEO of MySpace. Bambi, you want to get us started?
Sure, Alex. That's the last time I ask Alex to provide any filler. Thank you. I'm not a day over 29. Anyway, Mike, welcome.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
So what do you think? You got to look at the 5 first top presenters.
Yep.
Any feedback for them?
Yeah, I think it's interesting the kind of class of company we're seeing now. So if we go through it, we had, walk me through them. So we had a lighting company that was kind of changing like internal marijuana grow houses.
Yeah.
You know, which
personal gardening.
It's probably a great business. You know, console OS changing traditional OSs into Android, which is interesting. NABThat around autos and insurance. Upside revolutionizing financial planning and kind of a SaaS business and then Whistle, which is dealing with service on demand. It seems like within hospitality. So what's fascinating to me is that all these companies are very logical companies, right? There's no reason in a lot of ways why these companies shouldn't be successful, because they're taking things that we already do and they're taking businesses that already exist and they're reimagining those businesses through the lens of technology. And that's really neat. So I don't think there's anything there that's truly creating a new behavior. Maybe Android on Windows is a new behavior, yeah. But generally everything else is applying technology vision into an already existing problem. And I feel like if we looked at businesses years and years ago, we see a lot of things around totally new ideas. Will people share photos? Will people connect online? Will people online date? It's completely new behaviors. Where now it feels like you have this generation of technologists and entrepreneurs that are re-envisioning the world through their eyes, and they're applying it to everyday problems, ranging as far as lighting inside of indoor grow houses to financial planning institutions.
Right. That's fascinating with the lighting, which is sort of on top of the leveraging that trend toward personal farming and organic farming.
Yeah.
And we have another company that's coming up in the number 6 through 10 that's also going after that industry. And we also have a 3D printing company.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see a lot of changes, hardware, 3D printing, wearables.
Mm-hmm.
That's also something new.
Yeah.
That's sort of the difference. We're not looking now at social apps or just mobile apps. We're going into hardware, wearables.
Yeah.
Do you think at one point it used to be that 500,000 was the new 5 million? I think everybody here knows what that's about, right? Because it used to cost a lot of money to start a company 10, 15 years ago, but when you're creating apps, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because the infrastructure is there. But now that we're moving into this world of Internet of Things and wearables, do you think the pendulum is swinging back?
On capital raises?
Yeah.
Well, it makes me feel two things. First off, has everyone seen, I assume everyone here has seen the movie Zero Dark 30. And there's this moment in Zero Dark 30 where the head of the CIA walks into their field office and wherever they are and pounds a table and says, there's no other team. You are the team to solve this problem. There's no other team. There's no shadow force trying to solve this problem. This is the team. So the reason why that's a relevant example for me is when you think of the startup that's reinventing lighting, I would have always thought to myself, well, gosh, Philips must be totally thinking of that. Or the group reinventing whatever SaaS for financial planners. I would have always thought, oh no, there's some massive group of Fidelity that must be doing that. The reality is this is the team. Right? So you're seeing things happen at an entrepreneurial level, which you would have assumed would have been done by these long legacy businesses. The same reason why SpaceX, you kind of have to scratch your head, right? You're like, wait, isn't there a B team? Isn't there another team solving the how we do unmanned missions to the moon? No, it's SpaceX. It's this group. It's entrepreneurs now. So first off, that's exciting, but it also means that I think everything can be re-envisioned. On the capital raise question, I definitely agree in that when you deal with hardware, you're dealing with inventory, you're dealing with cost, and you're dealing with warehousing and accounts payable, and it makes everything twice as hard. And the kind of 2-3 person group coming out of a college that quickly coded and designed an app, they typically do not have the financial DNA in my mind to step into a business where they're doing large SaaS sales with huge amount of cash movements and warehousing and inventory purchasing. It becomes very, very complicated, which means that I think the entrepreneurs of today that are touching these traditional industries and changing them, they need to have a little bit deeper DNA than we typically saw within financial management, cash flow, banking relationships, debt, those types of businesses. And they obviously need a lot more capital up front if they're really going to take a run at it.
Well, let's talk about capital. How many here are Well, how many here are have founded a company? That's quite a bit. How many are first-time founders? Oh, okay. So they've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
So, but I'm sure you still need some guidance and advice on fundraising, especially today. It's quite difficult, particularly if you're going for your sort of post-seed Series A, because there's a lot more money coming in to just feed and seed the earliest stages, pre-seed companies.
That's right.
So, what's your advice to your companies when it comes to weathering the storm or staying solvent until you get that next round?
Sure. Well, we have a number of companies in our portfolio. Some we found are really easily fundable. They have very dynamic founders that are really exciting. They're in a market where somehow just capital kind of naturally flows to them, and it's very exciting. We also have other businesses which frankly are great businesses but have been very difficult to fund. One thing I've noticed is regardless of how easy or hard it is to fund on the first stages, everyone seems to hit this like teenage awkward stage in the business. And in my mind, the teenage awkward stage is where you're kind of looking at the fundamentals of the company. Maybe you have some revenue, maybe you have some clients, you have some process you've developed, and you have to take a very sobering look saying the cost that we're taking to build the software, develop the customer base, attract the clients, is it really warranting the sales that we would expect? And we see it quite frequently now, companies that have this like growing top line with an escalating and growing bottom line that somehow grow at the same pace in the wrong directions. Or the top line's growing, but the bottom line seems to be growing in equilibrium. And there's a lot of moments now, I think, in a lot of boardrooms where investors and CEOs are looking at these P&Ls saying like where's that curve at the bottom that brings my net margin up or kind of reduces my operational overhead or I get some sort of leverage. So I think the reason why that's important is as much as maybe capital was easier to grab in the last 2 years, whether at some point all these companies hit this teenage stage. And at some point, they have to be able to show real progress in a real business, especially if you're disrupting traditional industries. And so, we definitely push our companies to find repeatable, systematic ways to grow their business, develop those features, keep those costs low, so that when it comes there, they're actually going in the right direction. They're not just expanding costs as they're expanding top line.
Did you have a situation where you had a startup that had a great idea but just couldn't figure out how to do that? And how do you just...
Yeah, I mean, we have tons of startups that happen. I think one thing we're good at is spending as little money as possible to try to learn before we hit that point. But I'll tell you, like, as much as we can all, as technologists and entrepreneurs, re-envision the world through our eyes and the lens of technology, some things are just fundamentally too expensive to build as a business, even though logically it makes a lot of sense. And the easy example for me often is local sales. Like, there's so many ways that I would love to work with local businesses through my mobile phone. But there's a lot of cost when you're dealing with salespeople that need to walk up and down streets and sign contacts with dry cleaners and cafes and bars. It's just a lot of physical cost. Even though logically in our Jetsons vision of the future, it all does happen on the phone, there's a lot of investment to get to there that a lot of venture may not want to invest in. So we definitely hit times where frankly like the cost or the need or the resources needed to scale that company simply outweigh the long-term benefit of doing the business. Whereas then, even though it's a logical outcome for the future, it's just something we can't get there.
It sounds like, and I want to touch on failure and bring up this quote because I love this quote. So Thomas Edison said, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Mm-hmm. And so do you think that in terms of what you've seen with your startups and when they fail, is it because they just don't know how to manage their money? Is it the cost? Is it the team? What are some of the top reasons that they fail?
90% I think of all startups failure typically unfortunately relies on the execution ability of the leadership, right? I mean, because generally what you find is great passionate entrepreneurs will typically try to get in front of problems and manipulate the business to some point of long-term success, or sometimes you have maybe stubborn or more difficult entrepreneurs that keep going down a failing path and they end up at just an end spot and it's just not going to work out, which of course I've done many times. So this is no slight on entrepreneurs. Like, if you haven't failed at least a few times in your career as an entrepreneur, you're definitely not trying hard enough. So I think one piece is that it does all come down to leadership and how leadership handles those abilities. With that said, time, you could, great sport analogies. You've never lost a game. You've only run out of time. Time is money. You're burning money. You only have a certain amount of money. You need to raise more money. So certainly, if you had infinite time, you'd probably eventually become successful, but that would require infinite money, right? So you have to really think about this concept of velocity, growth, time, capital, and how it all comes together, and how you as a CEO or management team, manage those things to make sure that you give yourself the ability to be successful.
Right. So, yep, it starts at the top. I want to make this interactive, so I'm going to go to Slido to make sure that we get your questions.
Sure.
So let's start with that one question on the bottom, because it's been up there. What is your most promising company on your portfolio at the moment?
Oh, God. I mean, that's a hard question for anyone that has a portfolio of businesses, right? I can say that, I won't even say promising, what I'll say is last month, we had a company that grew, at rates we hadn't seen, and that company happens to be called FameBit, and they're here in Los Angeles, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. They work within the YouTube ecosystem. It's a very surprising breakout business, but that one looks extremely incredible just because it happened to be last month they had a breakout business, right? We have a bunch of early stage kind of labor on demand-esque marketplaces that I think early signals look very, very positive, but they're very early. So there's always a lot of stuff happening within science, and we also acquired Playhaven that we announced last week. That's a fairly sizable mobile ad network that we have a lot of belief behind too. So we have things at large scale that I think will naturally get larger. We have some things that are small that are getting large, and then we have some very small things that look very promising. So it's all at different phases.
Well, and you started in 2011, right?
3 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, so 3 years, so relatively young. But just talk a little bit about, just so everyone here understands that your model, you acquire companies, you incubate them from within, you call yourself a studio.
Sure.
It's not really an accelerator.
Yeah, so I mean, fundamentally, we have a bunch of people that work at science, and our goal is to build hit companies. That's basically it, right? Sometimes we're happy to buy a later stage business and try to make that even into a further hit company. Sometimes we'll work with early stage entrepreneurs, invest in them, provide them resources for them to become hit companies. We generally focus on things that touch millennials. So if you look at generally across our consumer-facing portfolio, it's things that millennials are going to use. In order to be good at that, we also resource heavily on regards to how you market to millennials. How do you talk to them inside of platforms like Vine, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Pinterest, et cetera, right? And those are kind of strategic companies for us that help us build those big millennial breakout hits.
Why did you choose that model? And the reason I'm asking this, not necessarily investors, well, I mean, entrepreneurs would want to know, but I found this statistic, 129 VC funds closed in, I think, the last year or so. Everybody seems to want to be a VC after after an entrepreneurial stint. So,
so why not become a VC?
No. Why? Well, what's the biggest challenge? You chose the studio model. You chose that particular model versus just an accelerator model. So why that model?
In order for us to create breakout hits, a lot of times startups need resources beyond what they can afford. And unfortunately, the way that venture capital is structured, you typically don't have the operational budgets at the VC level to really have resources to make sure those companies become successful. Generally, VCs have two things they can primarily do. They can fund companies more, or they generally can replace management. And outside of that, it's really hard for them to really operationally help the growth of a business. My thought was, if I'm going to be in the business of identifying great early stage entrepreneurs, levering them up, hopefully becoming the next great leaders inside the industry of technology, I want to have a lot of resources to provide them to be very successful. I just simply couldn't do that through the financial structure that was venture capital. I could do that through the financial structure that is an operating company. So I chose to do that because I wanted to be spending my time on building hits, right? And I wanted to have a lot of resources to really make sure those companies become successful. And the only way I was able to do it was as our studio.
Well, let's talk about how do you find those hits and some of the promising fields for science startups in the next decade. I'm looking at Slido here. So what are some of those fields that you will be looking at?
So I mean, generally we would start with, let's look at really big, outdated industries that have huge market caps or tons of revenue or touch people's lives on an everyday basis, and then let's think about how we can approach those industries and change them. So one good metaphor is saying, think of a wallet, and think of how money comes into that wallet, and think of how money goes out of that wallet, and then think of all the services that will inject themselves between the in and outflows of that wallet for a consumer. Now remember, I'm very consumer focused, right? So that could be like, if you're Uber, you might say, Uber takes a little bit of money when it flows into a driver's wallet, and Uber takes a little bit of money when it flows out of that driver's wallet, and that becomes, or out of a rider's wallet, right? And I think like when on these kind of mobile on-demand labor marketplaces, you're really finding ways to inject yourself, in between the in and out payment flows of people's wallets or their bank accounts. So I think about that, and then I think about industries that really suck and that I hate to deal with, right? So maybe we all hate, I don't know, insurance, or maybe it's the way financial planners interact with you, or maybe it's the way you buy and sell stocks, maybe it's the way you purchase things online, maybe it's your grocery stores, whatever. But I think to our own personal experiences as primary level consumers, now and think like, what do I hate doing? And let's find a better way to do it, and will it fit that model?
You talked about labor markets a couple of times.
Yeah.
Sort of, I'm thinking sort of like Odesk, right? That's a
Sure.
good example.
Yeah.
Do you have any companies in your portfolio that are?
Well, I mean, Dog Vacay is definitely a marketplace around
Okay.
connecting dog owners and dog sitters. We have a company called Home Hero that connects elders that need in-home elderly care with nurses on demand. That's another interesting in and out of the wallet business. We have one we're about to launch in fitness that we're really excited about. We have another one we're about to launch in insurance that we're really excited about. So we do a lot of those, and we look at a lot of the sectors and determine where we want to play.
And then as far as if there are any companies out there that are sort of fit into that bucket,
Yeah.
you can work with them. I mean, how much do you invest?
I mean,
Typically?
we've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars into
Okay.
companies, and we also
So
have acquired companies.
different stages, right.
So, I mean, what we look at is how do we create a number one breakout hit
Got
in
it.
whatever we're focused on? What do they need? They need money. They need resources. They need investors. They need partnerships. They need staff. They need whatever. And then we make sure that they get that, right?
Are you?
I mean, in a certain sense, think about this. It's fairly illogical for any of those companies on the stage, right, the last 5 that presented, for them to tell you exactly how much money they need to become successful. Like, that's a totally illogical question. How much money do you exactly need to win? How much money does it take from now until you sell? I want to know the exact number, and that's what I'll fund you with, right? It's ridiculous.
I want to say as much as possible.
As much as possible. Like, throw it in that account because you really don't know, right? And so we take that approach of like, let's align with you and make sure you get there. Because I don't think anyone here can exactly tell you the amount because it's ridiculous. It's predicting the future.
They can tell you how much they need to get some traction, to get
Some
to a place
traction.
where they get
That's right.
get traction. And that's really all they have to do, right? I mean,
Is it? I mean, I've seen a lot of companies with traction not get funding. And I think we've seen a lot of companies with traction not get acquired.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I think startups have to manage their unknowns, right? And unfortunately, funding events are unknowns that you have to think and manage through because you don't control that next funding event.
No, you don't. But I do want to touch on LA. So we talked a lot about fundraising. I want to talk about LA. And do you invest solely in LA companies? They can
No.
be anywhere. Okay, but we are in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think some of the assets are in LA? What kind of startups should be here and what kind of assets should be leveraging? If there's startups that aren't based in LA, why should they be in LA?
Right. Well, I mean, I think through a little bit on the end state of these businesses. So I think there's companies that provide strategic kind of technical benefit to large corporations that are based in the Valley. And I think those are harder to have in LA because M&A is thought of in a regional sense, right? So there's definitely a time when there's some CEO at a big Valley company that's thinking of buying a company and they're debating, do I really want to get on a plane? Are those people going to move? What's going to be my retention rate if I buy that company out of my city and then I have to move them up there? And when they get here, are they all going to get recruited, right? So you do have to realize that the end buyer of certain companies is focused regionally, and they think through those regional aspects when they consider acquiring companies. On the flip side, there's some businesses in LA that naturally would become big enough that they could stay in LA post-acquisition, right? And so I think through a little bit the mentality of the buyer at the end of the day and whether or not this is logical for it to be an LA company or if maybe eventually they need to go and move within proximity, right? There's businesses like Goodreads that grew up very heavily inside LA based, then they moved up to the Valley, and then they subsequently got acquired by Amazon, right? Now, I think that they would have been valuable to Amazon here in LA, but they're probably a little bit more valuable to Amazon now that they're in the Valley, inside their office is fully integrated.
But what kind of, I don't think we've touched on the assets here, though, in LA. So
That are breakout assets?
Assets that people, that they would actually move here for, just startups, not people acquiring, but
Sure.
just startups. Why
Well,
would they move
we
here?
certainly see mobile companies and mobile startup teams moving to LA to build mobile apps here, right? And that is because of Snapchat and Whisper and the kind of pioneering things they're pushing through on being big mobile apps. We definitely see ad tech move to LA from the Valley, right? So they're coming into LA, they're basing their headquarters
And should
here.
they be here?
Well, I think
would
these are
ad tech-
logical industries to be here. There's a lot of ad spend here. There's certainly a lot of kind of mobile social activity here. So those are logical places.
This is a good question. Where is your best source for deal flow?
Let's see. I mean, we spend time kind of going everywhere, right? So we obviously spend a lot of time in Angel List because Angel List is a lot of the first touch point for probably a lot of the startups and probably a lot of startups in this room. We spend a lot of time in networking events. We get a ton of incoming. But we also are fairly sector focused. So sometimes our best deal flow is narrowing on an area where we want to focus and then progressively just searching and reaching out to startups that have interests in those areas.
And then after Snapchat and Whisper, who's 3, 4, 5? Why are there so many
startups
Really?
that haven't soared in LA?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first off is I think there's Snapchat and Whisper exciting, but the other thing that's kind of exciting is that you've got J2 Global, you've got Clearstone, you have TrueCar, you have Rubicon, you have Demand, you have a number of public companies that are either here on the west side or in the LA basis. And that's frankly somewhat new for us because we typically haven't had a lot of public technology companies headquartered in our region. So first off, that's exciting, right? Then you have startups that in essence, specifically Snapchat, that are turning down fairly large M&A offers saying we're going to really go for it. So that's a neat moment for us, being like we're going to become really big. Maybe Snapchat becomes an acquirer, not an acquired, right? And that's a change again for the LA culture. And then you have a lot of companies that are bubbling up really nicely that look big. I mean, Honest Company's going to be big, right? I mean,
billion-dollar valuation.
Yeah, I mean, Just Fab looks like it's going to have some big numbers, right? There's a bunch of game companies in town that have done extremely well. So, I don't think that there's a lot of startups that haven't soared in LA. There's a lot of startups that haven't soared in every city, right?
Right. And we will have Whisper and we will have Honest Company later today.
Yeah, those are exciting
I think our
businesses.
time's up, but I do want to ask a question. So just in terms of the dollar flow coming in here. So if you look at San Francisco and the Bay Area, in about 2003, San Francisco accounted for about 3% of all the Bay Area dollars, venture dollars. Today it accounts for 56%.
Yeah.
But if you look at LA and relative to the venture dollars being invested, it's about 3%. 10 years ago, it's still about 5% today. How do we move the needle to get more money invested in LA?
I mean, unfortunately, I don't see that needle moving anytime soon. And Snapchat for me is like the primary example of why that needle isn't moving. So you have this breakout company of Snapchat in early days. I don't think I could tell you more than 2 or 3 individuals in LA that are investors in Snapchat, but I could name almost a dozen individuals in the Valley that are investors in Snapchat. And one of the problems is that, if Snapchat continues to go big and at some point there's some monstrous event, what happens is those investors that redeem that capital, they're up in the Valley, and still 97% of their capital then, when they continue to invest it, will be within the Valley region. Right? So one of the problems that LA has as a city is that when we have hit companies, typically that capital is immediately pushed out of LA as a city, which means that then we don't get that natural return. Like think about everybody that made all this money inside Facebook as an easy example. They go out and they back all their friends that are all regionally specific to them within the Facebook, San Francisco ecosystem. But if all the investors that benefit from Snapchat or Honest Company or TrueCar, whatever, if they're primarily Valley-based, then that money stays within the Valley because it stays within a proximity. So we still have a bit of a problem. We certainly don't have that many active funds in LA. We certainly need to 100% rely on the Valley, in my mind, for true long-term financing events. But the other problem we really need to do is get more LA investors putting more money into LA companies so when they sell, that money stays within our ecosystem because it's not staying right now.
Right. It's not happening now, but it will. It will grow.
So. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do
All right,
it.
everyone. Let's just thanks, Frank.